Well, just one more thing to do, and I suppose you all know what it is. Let's get down to business. We need to talk about Mulan. More specifically, we need to talk about what's happening with the release of Mulan. And then we need to talk about the possible implications and fallout of this. Now, some of the points that I'm going to be saying are going to be somewhat reiterative of points that I made not too long after Trolls World Tour came out, because it's basically a continuation of that. So, quick reminder, Trolls World Tour was released by Universal, and it went video on demand and did quite well of it. But then when Universal started in a very loose lips fashion saying, well, maybe we'll do more stuff like this and won't put as many movies in theaters, well, theater chains got very uppity about that, and battle lines started getting drawn. And the thing is, Disney was on the side of the theater chains. Disney was siding with them in most of this. Now, I don't want to make it sound like Disney is a big champion of theater chains. Disney takes super advantage of theater chains and theater owners. It's companies like Disney that's why these places are profitable on their concessions, not on their movie tickets, because with the big tentpole movies like Star Wars or the big Marvel movies, Disney has very strict demands of these places. They demand a higher percentage of the box office take. They demand that their stuff gets put in the highest seating capacity theaters, that it has, and oftentimes they have a minimum number of weeks that they have to run in those largest theaters. But all that being said, Disney does want theaters to remain open. That's very much part of its business model, that especially because Disney has been kicking butt theatrically. Like some studios, like Universal, honestly, they can have it really mixed from time to time. And you can see why maybe they'd start looking at a more blended release schedule, or maybe just start looking more to video on demand in general. Disney, though, they make a lot of money on their theatrical releases, and they want to be able to keep doing that. But Mulan has now kind of changed the playing field a little bit. So Mulan was originally supposed to come out back in March, I think. It was then moved to an August date, and now it has been announced it will be released video on demand for Disney Plus. Now, you have to already have a Disney Plus subscription. It's only going to be available through that service. And you don't just get to watch it because you have the subscription. You are going to have to pay $30 for the privilege of watching it. And if that sounds like a lot, that basically, it depends on whether or not you've got a kid. Because, at your average movie theater, $30, parent, kid, tickets in, done. But that doesn't cover concessions. It doesn't cover popcorn, nothing like that. But if you're a family, heck, if you're a single parent with two kids, say nothing of something like a family of four, then $30 is actually a really good deal for you. So I don't doubt that this is going to probably do pretty well for Disney, but you could tell they didn't want it to come to this. I think pretty much everybody involved was really crossing their fingers that this pandemic was going to clear up and theaters were not only going to reopen, they were going to go back to normal and have that happen by now. And Disney's far from the only one being impacted by this. Tenet, Christopher Nolan's latest, keeps getting pushed back. They're still claiming that there will be a theatrical release, but with something as big as Mulan was expected to be, and that, you could make the argument that Trolls World Tour had the potential to be more of a sleeper hit. It wasn't looking to be a blockbuster. It did well, and it probably would have done well in theaters, but it wasn't going to be looking to be one of the biggest films of the year. Mulan was. So for them to take that off the theatrical schedule, that's a big deal. So the question people might be wondering is if Disney wants theaters to remain in business and healthy, why are they doing this? Why don't they keep waiting? Well, because they can't sit on this stuff forever. For a number of reasons. The first is they're missing significant chunks of expected revenue that were planned to have for this year. And while they can maybe push some of that back, they need some of it to move forward, to generate something this year. Not to mention the fact that, a lot of these studios are starting to look into restarting production again, but they've also got a whole slate of movies that have been pushed back, which means that instead of doing the normal thing of they start shooting something in the latter end of this year to be released either next year or early in 2022, they're looking out to 2023, even for things that aren't big, massive special effects things that require the extra time, just because they've already got a full slate that they just keep pushing back and back and back and back and back. And at a certain point, you got to start releasing some of those things, if only because you make it pointless that you're making new stuff because you're sitting on existing stuff. I'm not shocked, actually, that Disney has said, because one of the immediate questions was, you're going to do this for Black Widow, too? Because that was supposed to have been out by now. That was supposed to be May, I think. And Disney and Marvel have gone, no, we do not plan to do that for Black Widow right now. We plan to release that theatrically, probably 2021. So, like I said, they did not want to do this. You can tell everything about this Disney did not want to do, but eventually it's what made the most sense, or rather it didn't make sense anymore to not do it. Now, as far as theater chains go, this is rough. This is really bad, because if fewer major tentpoles come to theaters, especially as they are trying to start looking to reopen, or if more things get released to video on demand in a shorter window, or things like that, which that is pretty much going to happen. So AMC worked out a deal with Universal that gave some concessions to Universal in terms of how quickly after the theatrical release could something go available digitally. And AMC had to make some concessions to what Universal wanted, because AMC is not the only theater chain, but they're one of the biggest, along with Regal. And they had to give up some stuff because they are not in a strong bargaining position right now. Officially, movie theaters are supposed to start reopening again towards the end of this month, August. We'll see what that happens. If it happens, it's probably not going to be across the board. It's not going to be suddenly all theaters across the country are going to be open. And there's always the possibility that they get shut down again. Most of them, even if they reopen, they're not going to be allowed to fill to capacity. They're going to have all these new procedures that they're going to have to put in place to sanitize the space after each screening, all of which is going to involve extra money. And this isn't even speculation on my part. Recently, there is word coming down from AMC that they are probably going to extend the additional cost of the things they have to do in terms of sanitization and cleanliness. They're probably going to pass that on to the consumer, which from a balance book perspective, I get, but and depending on how dire their financial situation, they may have no choice but to do that. But it really is not a good idea, and if they can avoid doing that, they should, because we're looking at, some people are going to just be like, woo, movies! Yeah, but the thing is, a lot of people are either going to still be scared of this thing, so the idea of inviting them out to gather around a whole bunch of strangers in a public place, that's already a dicey proposition. You're asking them to come out and to an experience that we've gone some months without, which brings up the possibility that maybe some people are starting to wonder, do I really miss it that much? And you're going to start charging them more for the privilege of this whole thing. Again, they may have to. There may be no choice but to do that. But that's a bad look. Thank Thank you for coming back and supporting us and helping us through this tough time. Give us more money. Tickets are not $20 a pop. You know, it's not an enviable position for them to be in. And the other thing that people need to remember, because some folks might be wondering, well, U.S. is hardly the only market, and while the U.S. may be in not great shape when it comes to handling this thing, there are plenty of other markets that are doing better, and their theaters are opening. Well, yeah, but you need to remember, by and large, these domestic companies, you know, Universal, Paramount, Disney, Warner Brothers, they get a bigger cut of the box office domestically. Sometimes some of these distributors have to partner with somebody else when they do overseas, you know, whether it be China or Europe or anywhere else. And so they're losing part of a cut to that. They may not have as good a deal worked out with theater owners in other countries. Studios make notably less off of the international. I mean, like, the raw numbers are very good, but like their cut, the amount that actually goes to the studio, is a lot less. A lot of these studios really depend on the U.S. market for their bottom line, not just for the raw number, but for being more profitable business, because they take a larger percentage in the U.S. market. The vast majority of them do. With Mulan going video on demand, the question is whether this is going to open the floodgates. Because there's the distinct possibility, if this goes well, which, to be honest, we may not know, because streaming numbers don't have to be reported. It's not like TV ratings, which, because, you know, they're being broadcast on public airways, you know, we find that information out. Streaming service numbers, we only know what they are if these streaming services tell us, and they generally don't unless they're like insanely high numbers. Other than that, they talk in vague platitudes. Oh, well, it did very well for us. But if it appears to do well, or good, if it does well enough that Disney is actually willing to brag about the actual numbers, that could open the floodgates for pretty much everybody else to go a similar route. Now, I would say the only other service that's really in a position to do it exactly the way that Disney is doing it with Mulan is Warner Brothers, because they've got HBO Max. They have a fairly sizable platform to get it done on. Most of the others, they either don't have their own platform, or if they do, it doesn't have anywhere near the market penetration of Disney Plus or even HBO Max. So it's hard to know how far this will ripple out, but this is potentially the start of a massive shift. Not necessarily because anybody wants theaters to die, but because studios can't sit on these things forever. And this pandemic is dragging on, and it's going to continue to. Hate to be the bearer of bad news on that, but that's the reality. I'm honest, I am really worried about my local movie theater. I'm lucky enough to live in a town that has a local theater as opposed to something that's part of a massive chain, because I don't like the big chains. I like my rinky-dink little local theater. And I'm worried about it, because I know the big chains are struggling right now, and there's an open question as to how much longer they can hold out without reopening. And even when they reopen, if they're not able to fill to capacity, will that be enough to keep them going? I think we may be looking at a forced paradigm shift that it may not, I wouldn't expect it to see the elimination of theater going, but it's gonna impact it in some way. I would not be surprised if a fair number of theaters close and the emphasis on the theatrical release gets dialed back. We'll see. This bums me out more than it probably has much right to, but I really enjoy going to the theater. I like taking my kid to the theater. It's something that I don't want to see get swallowed up by this show that's going on, but may still be what happens. You know, with everything going on, maybe Maybe it's time we give up on movies and got back into books, said the aspiring author. Yeah, as if I didn't have a dog in that race, too. That's actually a very clumsy segue to another creator that I want to highlight, because since this video does not have a sponsor, I want to highlight another creator on this platform. In this particular case, it is a channel called The Artisan Geek, which the reason I had that awkward segue is it's a booktube channel where she talks about and reviews books, classics, new books. She'll do videos around a theme. She has a great presentation style. I really enjoy listening to her talk. If books are your bag too, she's a good booktuber and worth checking out, and I do definitely recommend her. Again, that is The Artisan Geek. So Mulan, going video on demand. What are your thoughts on that? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. You know all the stuff to do. I have a Patreon, which is what is keeping me in this house right now. And in addition to that, there is all the usual stuff like share, subscribe, bell, so on, all of which help me in at least a little bit in some way. So any or all of it, I deeply appreciate, but you also don't have to do any of it, because end of the day, you're the council. I just run the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned.